So how do you find data sets and Tableau resources um, to use? So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through a few slides and talk through how you go and find them. Bit of my background: before working at the Information Lab and Data School, I worked at Tableau as part of the Tableau public team. So I spent a lot of time finding and cleaning and visualizing publicly available data sources. So this is something that's close to my heart. And then we're going to go through a quick example of um, going from an idea to find a data set to building a quick viz. But I'll be, instead of sort of showing you how to build in Tableau, I'll just be talking through how I found each of the next steps, from finding the data to finding how to clean it, to figuring out how to build a particular chart type that I mightn't have known how to build before. So where is all the data? So one thing we ask, the main bit of your application we ask you to do is to build a set of visualizations on Tableau Public. That first visualization we ask you to submit with your application is on any data you find, any data at all. And we really recommend you use a data set you find interesting. And the reason for that is you're going to be spending a lot of time working with this data. So working with data you find interesting will make the whole experience much more enjoyable for you. But also, if you find the data interesting, you're probably much more likely to want to spend time getting to grips with that data set and finding all the insights you can within it. So where do you find that data? Well, everywhere. Once you begin to look, you'll realize that there are data sets and data absolutely everywhere. It's like the scene from the movie from Sixth Sense, when he goes like, "I see dead people walking around like regular people," and you'll end up being somebody who goes like, "I see data sets masquerading as just web pages." So you'll find data absolutely everywhere. So some of the main places where you might want to go to find data sets are government websites, NGOs, and large publicly focused organizations like NASA. So for the US, your gov.com has a lot of data. Large NGOs, the World Bank has a fantastic set of data sets, the UN, um, really good data, and even if it's not going to be your primary data set, really useful reference data. For instance, you might be looking at something that you want to end up looking, might be looking at, let's say, number of cars per country, and then you want to see the number of people living in the country, so you can look at number of cars per capita, for instance. And so you'd have to pull in a data set that has estimates on global population by country, and you might do that from a data set from an NGO like the World Bank. And lastly, large organizations like NASA. NASA has amazing sets of data about everything to do with space and the stars, but also with the weather here on Earth and other things like that. Usually these data sets are downloadable in either an Excel or a CSV format, and they are reasonably cleaned up, as in you will have to clean them, but the data is in some sort of structured format. Another place you may go are data set repositories like data.world. If you have participated in a Makeover Monday before, all the data sets that Makeover Monday used while it was running are up on data.world. So it's a really large website where there are repositories of data sets, or things like Google Dataset Search. If you just type into Google Dataset Search, you come up with a whole, Google has a whole search engine dedicated to finding data sets. And academic institutions. So colleges, universities, research facilities do publish a lot of data that maybe you might find interesting as well. Now, the third big set of places you will go to find, you could find data, are individual companies. Now, think things like Airbnb. These are private organizations that publish data sets around whatever they do, and they're really useful. Other ones might be individual weather stations and weather sites, where you could go ahead and find, let's say, number of hours of sunlight. I saw that Congress passed legislation earlier on this week, or even just yesterday, saying that this will be the last year that the US uses daylight savings time, and that going forward, all time will be fixed at daylight savings time. So will that have an impact on the number of hours of sunlight, for instance, you might want to see? So a weather service might be a place to go to find data like that. Another place might be your personal data. So you as a person leave a breadcrumb trail of data behind you digitally and in the physical world. Everything from downloading your own Netflix viewing data to your Spotify playlists and your Spotify listening, to you can even download, and this is terribly depressing, your emails. You can go into Google and download the metadata around your emails, so you can see how many terrible bits of spam, millions and millions of things you get over a year, for instance. So you have a lot of personal data on the web, and you should be able to access a large amount of it. And then there's the data on third-party apps that you actively record. For instance, if you are a runner or a cyclist or something like that, and you use Strava, you can download your Strava data yourself. And the last place you can go for data is hand collected and curated data. So these are things like you might want to have a tally sheet on a piece of paper or in a Google Sheets every time you have a cup of coffee during the day. So you will know how many cups of coffee you have and when you have them. Or it might be a very hand curated data set. For instance, you might have a personal journal where you jot down uh, how you feel each day, and you could turn that into a data set as well. So these are all sort of places about where you can find data. But data being everywhere means a lot of it is in a format that might be a little bit challenging for you to access, especially if you don't have use of tools like Alteryx, or you aren't a confident or a familiar coder with things like Python. Data that isn't in an Excel or a CSV format can be quite difficult to get down. And that's not even talking about how messed up or ugly data in Excel's files or CSVs can be once you download them. So if you are grabbing data off the web somewhere, lots of websites use APIs if they don't let you download in a sort of standard file format. Some API, if they do allow API, if you can access their data via an API, please do check it. The rules about using data, but also the how-to. Some APIs allow you to extract the data directly from the URL. So you just have to add a whole bunch of modifiers to the end of the URL to pull down that data. The documentation for each individual website is your best place to go for that. Other APIs require you to pull data via using something like Python. There's some really good tutorials online about how to do that. If you do find it terribly intimidating though, don't worry. You can use a lot of free web scraping tools. So code-free web scraping tools. One I've used quite a few times before is webscraper.io, and this lets you scrape structured data from websites. And when I mean structured data, I mean something that sits in a consistent HTML format. So if you're a sporting fan and you have your team's web page with each player's profile, that's the same structure for each player. They'll have like a picture, their name, what position they play, and some stats about them, let's say. And that will be repeated for each player. So you can pull that data down using a web scraper like webscraper.io because it's structured. And that might be a great way to build a data set for something you're very interested in, but mightn't be presented in a traditional data table kind of way. You can also use tools like if this and that, or Zapier, that trigger something online. So you could say every time somebody tweets using a specific hashtag, then write that to a line in Google Sheets. So you could do things like that. You could also use this to say every time it rains over my house, then log that into a spreadsheet. And the last one is Google Sheets itself has a set of importing functions, import data, import HTML. If you look on the documentation, you can see what options they have, and that you just write into a Google cell, like Sheet cell, as a function itself, and that can pull down structured table data and some unstructured data as well. And lastly, you can always collect and curate data by hand. So one thing I'm thinking about at the moment is I'm reading the set of Witcher books, and the character in the books Siri, if you are familiar with the Netflix series, or if you've read the books before, um, in the Netflix series, she's got very blonde hair. However, in the books, her hair has so far been described as mousy brown, flaxen, ashen, and some other color. and they're all quite different colors. So I'm keeping just a hand jotted set of notes around where her hair color description changes and in what book. So you can always do some things by hand, although that can be quite time consuming, but it does mean that data set, you know it intimately, and that has some real benefits as well. So once you've got your data, what do you do with it? So a lot of things you may see amazing visualizations on Tableau, and the first thing you ask is, how did they do that? From how did they clean up that data and get it into Tableau, to how did they build that chart type, a jump plot with those amazing annotations and that unbelievable highlight action. The best place to think you can go is Google. Googling is your friend. Using search engines is the best way to find all this information. And that's because the Tableau community is so engaged, and they put blog posts out and create videos and training material for everything. So some places to go but that also means it's quite an intimidating way to start. It's such a big community, you mightn't have feel comfortable uh, communicating with people within that community, or you just might not know where the best entry point is. So some places I'd suggest would be to look at the Tableau Visionaries, formerly known as Tableau Zen Masters. Tableau publishes a list of them with their Twitter handles and from there you can grab their personal websites. They will put out lots and lots and lots of training material. So Andy Kriebel has an amazing website, VizWizBI, Tableau Visionary, with oodles and oodles of tips. The Fleurlage twins, also Tableau Visionaries, amazing websites with really detailed how-tos. So that's a great place to start. And similar with the Tableau ambassadors. So another sort of people within the community who've been recognized as being helpful and engaged in the particular areas, and they also put out lots and lots of material. Now, the Tableau forums and community pages are a must go to if you want to see how people have solved a similar problem to you before. Chances are somebody's asked a same question or wanted to do the same thing in the past, and chances are that is on a Tableau forum or a community page. So do go ahead and check those out. And you can also, it's a great place to ask questions if you don't feel comfortable using social media, which is sort of the primary way the Tableau community engages with each other, using Twitter. Then asking in the Tableau forums is a really great way to get started and to ask any questions you may have. And lastly, Tableau puts out a lot of resources themselves. The Tableau Help pages and the knowledge base might be a little more detailed than you need and don't usually include a how-to, but if you wanted to know what the data interpreter was, for instance, in Tableau, because you saw it on a blog somewhere and somebody said it was a great way for fixing Excel files in Tableau, and you have no idea what anything like that means, then the Tableau knowledge base would be the best place to go to get an overview of what that feature is and how to use it. And then you might jump back out once you had a bit more understanding, and then you maybe know what else you could search for and have a better idea of search terms. So that's a quick overview of how to find data and use it in Tableau. Luke, keep me honest, do I have time to share a really quick demo of how I do this in person, from finding a data set to finding how to create different types of visualizations, or are we running a bit late on time? And
I'll go for it, I reckon. Be
yeah,
useful.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. I know we started a little bit late. Okay, so let me minimize this and open up another screen. Okay, so I will zoom in here. Okay, so this had an idea. I was looking around today and I wanted to have a look at some data. Now, I've got a thing saying London Fire Brigade incident reports here. And the reason why I'm interested in fires in London is totally crazily, 10 days ago now, a house 7 houses down from me went up in flames. It was insane. Luckily, nobody was at home at the time, but the house is demolished. It was just like, it was quite something. And so I've been quite interested how common are house fires in London. So I'm Australian. I'm used to concepts of fires, but that's usually bushfires coming down and destroying property. It's quite scary when it's a house fire, which caused by who knows what, uh, spark going off in the back of a fridge or something like that. So I wanted to find some data around fires in London. So the first thing I did is, you can see here, I just typed in London borough fire data sets into Google. Not the most original search term in the world, but my first result here, London Fire Brigade Incident Reports London Data Store, looks quite promising. So that's just a simple, I am not using any advanced search. I'm not limiting my results to particular file types. This is just a straight, let's see what's out there. So I'll jump ahead and show you what this looked like. So there was some data. It was in a Excel and PDF format. I can see multiple years. Looks good, and I can download it. So I did just that, and I'll open up that data set for you. So this is what I downloaded. It was a data set structured in a table, and it had data for England average, and then it split the London boroughs up into inner London and outer London boroughs. So this looks useful. It's going to need a little bit of cleaning, because this table, it's got as you can see, it's on the right hand side, it's got a line chart. I'm not going to need that line chart in Tableau. And if I look at the actual data itself, I can see that if I'm interested in fires by borough, and a borough in London is equivalent to a sort of a large suburb, it's got England average, inner London average, and that average of those inner London is made up of all the boroughs within inner London. So I'm going to have some duplicate numbers here. So if I just pulled all this data into Tableau and didn't clean it up, and then remove things or filter out the London, inner London, outer London average, and the England average, I will be double and triple counting the number of fires. So anytime you download a data set, have a look at it, because you need to get to grips with how that data is structured, but also what that data is showing, so you understand how you can clean and work with it. I'd also recommend any data set or step you take, just to write it down somewhere. Keep a file, so you know where you've been, you know what data sets you've downloaded, where you found them, and any useful resources and tutorials you want to look at in the future. Otherwise, you end up with something like that first screen of mine you saw, which had, I think it was like 37 open tabs, which is embarrassing, and also a great way to get yourself confused. So perfect, I've got a data set here, but I'm going to need to clean it up a little bit. Now, I could do this by hand. I could duplicate this data set in Excel, and then manually delete some of these lines. For instance, this line 6, um, row 6 in a London, and I will also need to pivot it around, because I know Tableau likes data structured with individual fields in each column, and as I can see, I've got my date field spread out across multiple columns here. Now, I could do this in Excel or even by hand. This isn't a particularly large data set, but that would take a lot of time, and the chances that I would accidentally delete one cell or overwrite it increase exponentially. So I'd much rather do this all within Tableau if possible. So is this possible? So the next thing I wanted to find out is this possible? So I went ahead and Googled how to clean data in Tableau Desktop. Again, not the rocket science thing to look at. And I can see clean and shape data in Tableau Prep was my first hit. That's fantastic. However, let's say I don't have access to Tableau Prep, that's probably not going to be that helpful. However, a second hit I get is clean data from Excel, CSV, PDF, and Google Sheets in the Tableau Help using Tableau Desktop. Perfect. So if I go ahead and open up that link, I can see this thing, the data interpreter. Cool. So now I know a word data interpreter. Then this looks like really helpful. This is exactly what I want to do. I want to clean up my Excel sheets. I've got lines I need removed, and I need to pivot this all around. Data interpreter sounds like the thing I need. So if I go ahead and Google that with data interpreter, I find on my first page, Tableau quick tip data interpreter, 3 ways to save time, by a fantastic lady, SQL Bell, within the Tableau community. It's a great video to watch, and it shows me step by step in a way that I find easier to follow along than reading it in the knowledge base. Brilliant. So if I go ahead and open up Tableau, I'll make this full screen, and I'll go ahead and grab my data and move it on there. I could watch that video and see how I could clean this up myself. If I maximize this bit of the screen and roll it over without stopping share, we can see it looks like it did in Excel. I've got some blank lines, I've got some extra information, and I've got these England average here, the things I can need to clean up. But I can use that data interpreter way over on the left-hand side. If I just click that button, Tableau looks at my data set for me and thinks of ways it could clean it up. And it notices that what looks like data doesn't start in the first row, it started a few rows down. So it's cleaned it up as best it could. And actually, this looks really good. I can go ahead and work with this data set now. So that's I could pivot round and begin to use it within Tableau itself. Brilliant. So now I've gone from finding data to cleaning it up, and I can go ahead and visualize now what that looks like, number of fires per borough in London. So I'll go ahead and open that up. So I made a line chart and a London borough map, which I will, there we go. Now, this isn't the most inspiring visualization at all, but it's a place to start, and I can begin to ask questions and see where else I'd like to go from this. Now, what I can see, if I hover my mouse over this top line here, City of London seems to have exceptionally more fires on average every year than any of the other boroughs within London. However, if I look down at my map, City of London, it's tiny, the actual geographic area. And I've got some, even though I'm looking at this data, which is by per thousand of the population, so it is already accounting for population size within each borough, but this isn't a very helpful view because I'm not interested in the geographic size of the boroughs, I'm interested in what's happening within them. So I want to have each borough represented by the same amount of space to make it easier to see, if nothing else. So what would my next step be from that? Let's go ahead and jump back into Tableau. Sorry, jump back into Google. I would, now I'm having a look at one of DS28's applications that he made to get into the data school. And I can see there's this map here. This looks fantastic. It is a stylized map. This is a stylized map of England, but I can see that each, in this case, it's county, is represented by about, the same sort of sized icon. Fantastic. This is what I want for my London boroughs, but I don't know what this is called. All I know, it's a map with shapes, tiles, area, something like that. And I can also use a resource that I found when I was Googling, which is the Tableau Visual Vocabulary. This is done by Andy Kriebel, head coach. And you can actually open it up in Tableau, and this is a great resource to show you what you want to show. So what I'm interested in showing is a change over time. I'm not actually interested in showing the actual geographic area. So how change over time? I really like that line chart. And this is just reloading. Thank you, Tableau Public. So I want a line chart and I like that weird shape map. Can I combine them in some way? So next thing I Googled was tile or shape map, and I even spelt shape incorrectly. That is just terrible in Tableau. But thankfully, Google has better spelling than I do in spell check. And if I scroll down, I can see Tableau tip how to create time series tile map grids. This sounds very promising, and that little thumbnail icon looks helpful. If I zoom in a little bit more, it kind of looks like a map of the states with stuff over it. That could be very helpful. I'll zoom back out again. And I can also scroll down and I can see there's some data school, how to create a hex tile map in Tableau. And if I scroll down a little bit more, there's a how to create a tile map in Tableau on the Tableau website. All brilliant resources coming up on that first page within the first 10 hits. So one was how to make tile grid maps in Tableau. yes, this is what I want. Now I know the name I'm looking for is a tile grid map, not tile shape, but I was pretty close just from trying to describe what I saw and then looking at the visual vocabulary. I could see this looks pretty promising. How do I do it? There's a similar one by Ben Moss, a former data scholar. He graduated now, and this is actually using London. Yes, so I can even find uh, somebody who's done this for London, and I can base my visualization off this. Fantastic. And if I scrolled all the way down, I've actually got a link to where I could find uh, this data set and this visualization so I could try and copy it. Brilliant. So I Googled tile map view London, and I also found there was a template for London boroughs and wards from the London data store. So now I've, in the space of a few Googles, I have found a Tableau resource showing me how to make a tile map from scratch. I have found a hex map similar to a tile map for London, which I might be able to use as an example. I have found an official London data store from the London data.london.gov.uk site, Excel mapping templates for London boroughs and wards, which I downloaded. And if I open it up, it's the beautiful looking tile map right here that I could edit maybe and turn into a data set myself. And I also found a um, a video from on Andy Kriebel, how to create a US tile map with a line chart within it. So if this is everything I need. So the first thing I need to do is either download or create that London Borough tile map. So I'm going to open up this London Borough uh, London Borough for the London data store that we just had open, and I can see my original data set. So what I need in this original data set, if I go ahead and read that tutorial from Tableau and from Ben Moss, is I need my data to have rows and columns on it as well. So if I went and had a look at that map, I could figure out, I've just copied it over here and got rid of all the extra spaces. I can go ahead and, because this is quite small, manually count across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, row 1, column 5, Einfeld. So I can go ahead and create manually these little, this grid reference for myself. And because I've got a borough name that matches across to my borough name and my London Fire dataset, I can join those two datasets together in Tableau easily and create a tile map following Andy Kriebel's video tutorial. And that's exactly what I did. It took me following his tutorial step by step. I had all the exact same fields. I had row, column, which gave me a grid. I had a date field that I was using to visualize change over time. And with a tiny bit of formatting, which Andy actually shows you how to do in the video as well, I could create a London Borough tile map with a line chart within each tile showing the number of fires per 1,000 people each year. And this actually wasn't very hard to do. Every step of the way, I found a resource, a Tableau resource, a Tableau community resource, or a published data set, or a very good example of something similar I wanted to do. So this is a great way to learn, and it's a great way to put together your visualization, and it gets you involved with the community. And if you've noticed, every step of the way I took, I thought of something and I found 2 or 3 extra resources as well. So it expands your vision of what's possible, and also gets you deeper and deeper into what you can do with Tableau and what you could do with your data. So I hope you found that a helpful example, and all the links I showed in the slides beforehand with the tips will go out with the presentations and the follow-up tomorrow or Friday in the video for this. So hopefully you found this really helpful. And now next up, we're going to have hear from current data scholars and have a look at their final visualizations for their applications. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to jump back into Remo, and I'm going to turn my camera back on. So hopefully you found that really helpful. And now. What's the time? Alicia, thank you. First off the bat. So we've got a few people. I would try and share my presentation again, but I've had no luck sharing. So we're going to go through a few of my colleagues who will go tell us about their applications. So first up is Alicia. So I'm going to turn my camera off, put myself on mute. And Alicia, if you'd like to show us your visualization, your application visualization, and tell us a little bit about any tips you've discovered and what you'd do differently if you could redo it this time.
Thank you very much, Sophie, for all of that useful information. Hello, everybody. My name's Alicia, and I'm from Data School Cohort 21. And I mean, before I share my screen, I think I'll probably talk a bit about my journey, tell you a bit about me. So I'm currently on my third placement at a private equity firm. My second placement was at a healthcare company, and my first was at PwC. I also studied criminal justice and criminology, and then I did a law conversion known as a graduate diploma in law afterwards. So not so much conventional background before coming into all of this. But also related to where I went with my application process, I will probably start with a question. So how many of you have a hobby or passion, whether it's sports, football, tennis, art? Maybe you got into crochet during the pandemic, or reading, cooking, politics. The list is pretty endless. And if you're feeling brave enough, you can drop into the chat if you do have a hobby or a passion. But otherwise, you can hold that thought and we will go back to this. So to start with my application, and I'll talk about my first, I applied with a data set I found on the gov.uk site. And this was on the ethnic disproportionality in the criminal justice system. So already my background and what I studied is falling into this. I first applied with a data set on a topic that was very familiar to me. And at university, I had a society where we went on a trip to Parliament with a panel of people, including guest speakers, MPs, and the latter. But myself and my co-society president started it all with data. We wanted to use data to really make the attendees and panel members feel uncomfortable about the situation, but use it to highlight those key issues and enable a debate, I guess. So now I think of it, I wish I had Tableau to demo a dashboard, then present a printed slide with facts and figures on it, because that would be a lot more interesting. But anyway, the data was on a government website. It was accessible to all. And thankfully, Sophie's already introduced some websites that could be relevant to you. And it was also something I didn't need to rely on for a data dictionary to understand, because I kind of knew what was coming in terms of the data that I would find from all the studies that I carried out. And I also had further context on why the data looked the way that it did. So it was quite helpful to do it on something like that. So going back to how I started, I mentioned passion and hobbies, and I'm seeing the chat go off, which is really handy to know. I'm seeing table tennis. So these kinds of topics, there's so much data surrounding them, and you'd be surprised. You can collect it yourself if you want. But there's a lot of data, especially sports, politics as well. And already you've seen with my information on gov.uk, it's quite easily accessible, and you can get the same in the US. So this really helped my application process. I wish I had something tangible to show you from that first attempt, and I'm sorry that I don't. But I didn't get in with that visualization, but I can safely say it was the proudest that I've been of myself. And seeing those large tables, something that I spent 3 years studying and just learning through numbers, and adding interactivity to it was mind-blowing. I'm pretty sure where I was showing everybody my charts. I was like, I made this. It was really interesting to see. So what I did was I picked myself up, I got more feedback, and Luke probably was super sick of me, but I'm pretty sure he never gets sick of anybody. So if you want feedback, ask for it. It's the best way to go. So already tip number 1 is ask for feedback. If you feel like you can reach out to somebody, do that. If you're not sure who to reach out to, then ask Luke, ask anybody at the Information Lab would be willing to help you. I know I've spoke to quite a few of you who've attended previous meet and greets. I've already discussed extra tips and tricks. So on to attempt 2. This time I found a new data set, as it's really helpful to look at things with a fresh pair of eyes and start again. So again, sticking to what I knew and could talk on and on about, I picked another data set from gov.uk, but this time it was on hate crime in the United Kingdom. And it's always helpful to viz about what you know and not what just may look and seem good. Your passion truly does translate. So here is the final viz that I interviewed with on hate crime. So I'll just share my screen. So I've zoomed right in for you to see. So my topic was, is hate crime increasing? And I tallied it down to have the political effects of Brexit and the various terror attacks in the UK caused a spike in hate crime. So first of all, when it comes to the data cleaning aspect, I was quite lucky, and I mean, Sophie's already presented it for me, so I'm not going to go into too much depth, but the data interpreter was really useful. It's just a tick box that appears when you do pull in your data into Tableau. So with government data, they love adding text at the top, descriptions, subheadings, and then it gets to the table. So that data interpreter did most of my cleaning for me. It just pushed all of the information at the top away and the table up. So my data cleaning process wasn't too difficult, thankfully, but it can get quite tricky, and I do understand that. So I will share some other tips with a different viz in a moment. So if I just scroll through this, I start from the top, asking this question and trying to answer it through different parts. So I just have a simple line chart, and I've annotated it to attribute what could have been the reason why we see that spike. I also have these high level numbers, as you can see at the top. It's just refreshing. And I can hover over my donut chart to see a lovely lollipop chart. Sometimes I look back at this and I wonder why I picked some of these chart choices. But what you might notice going through this is it's actually incredibly simple. It's not too complicated, and it explains a story. So even though I look at it now thinking it could need a lot of improvement, back then this was my biggest accomplishment. I tallied it down to questions, like I said. So my next question was, what events have caused this rise over the past 3 years? And again, I probably can't answer this with specific events for certain caused this, but we can see spikes in the data through this heat map. And you can see these 3 areas here. So in 2016, July, typically around summer, that's when there's been a rise. And so what I did was use Google. Quite simply, I searched what was happening crime related in and around those dates and periods, and I found some key dates, which, I mean, I remember again studying because these were quite pivotal in criminal justice and criminology to learn about, but also it's stuff that's quite relevant. It's happened recently and I felt quite involved and could understand. So to pinpoint it to those particular dates, it made a bit of sense. And also I got to see the aftermath of what happened at the time. Again, it doesn't matter if you don't know too much about the data, but it's really helpful when you do, because then you feel more confident making some of these conclusions. But like I said, I can't say completely. So I've put some key events down to support my findings. I've also added a little instruction here saying you can use the highlighter tool to filter the heat map by month, and then also just how to read it. I'm pretty sure the text wasn't cut off when I published this, but Just to briefly talk through this, it's a simple bar chart and it's breaking down, so in which police area is racial hate crime the greatest, and we can see London and the Metropolitan Police. So Metropolitan Police, just to give you some context, operates in and around London. So I kept it really simple and just went for a bar chart because that showed everything quite well. So there is another point that I wanted to make here. There is no expectation of you to know everything. And if you do get asked something, it's okay to say that you didn't know and then ask how. So what I mean for this is, for example, I remember Andy asked me why I decided to visualize by location the way that I have in this chart, because his suggestion was that it could have been relative. At the time, I obviously didn't come from a data background. It's not a thought that I even considered. So I had to ask him, and I said to him, what do you mean? Could you explain this a bit more? And then he said it would be more insightful if it was per capita. And again, I still was a bit unsure. So I just said, sorry, could you explain this a bit further? And it makes sense now I look at it, and it made sense after he explained it, but I didn't know at the time. So it really is okay if you don't know what things are at first. And if somebody does ask you and you didn't consider it, it's okay to say, actually, that's a very good idea. Could you explain this a bit better? I will consider that next time. So what Andy meant was in London, there's a greater population. So of course, racial hate crime would be greatest in London. So by making it per capita, so per 100, and making it a bit more relative in terms of population, it could have been a bit more insightful, but it's fine. I didn't know that then. I do know that now. I must also note that I did email for a lot of feedback at this time, and I did my own research with finding out who I could speak to. So like I said, everybody in the community is really, really helpful. If you ask for feedback on Twitter, or like I said, you can get in touch with anybody in the company, and they will be willing to help you. So please don't be afraid to ask. Another thing to note is if you have too much data, think about posing a question. So you can see here that I made it really easy to hone in on certain areas just by posing a question, because with that question, I could easily think, what data points do I need to answer it and get to that endpoint. So just to conclude, I looked at if there's a gender bias with hate crime. And again, it's a simple bar chart, just comparing males and females. And it just comes to a conclusion for my whole visualization. One thing to note is you should include a footer and a reference, something I didn't do, I noticed when I opened this up earlier. What's quite handy about that is if you find anybody's visualization online on Tableau Public, you can actually find the data that they've used, because typically it would be referenced at the bottom. So don't do what I did here. And you can actually just open up those links and find some data. And also, just to reiterate, please don't feel the need to include really complex charts. I feel like this is a very simple visualization. You are a consultant as well. So there's a lot in this about the consultant aspect and being able to explain your findings and being able to talk through your visualization too. So just because I know that some of you have been through the initial stage and are at the final stage, oh, this is something else to note, but I'll show you that in a second. My final viz was on NFL data, and I mentioned on my table that I had absolutely no idea about anything, and I probably still don't now. But the data I was given was way out of my depth, and there was a lot of it. So the way, I felt really overwhelmed knowing I had a space of time in which I needed to complete a viz, but also how do I know what to look at in the data when I don't know what it is? So I actually broke it down into those questions, but even with the questions, it was too much data. And so I broke it down into top 10. So just at a reflection, you can see with this visualization, it's talking about what makes a top 10 quarterback, and that really helped me to summarize that data a bit better. One last thing that I want to mention that I've just briefly opened up is if you go to the Data School blog and you search for Dashboard Week, you can see everybody's blogs about what they did for Dashboard Week, but also something that I think might be useful to you if you're not sure about data sources and just want some inspiration, is if you scroll through and look for Andy's blog posts. So occasionally you'll see everybody's and then Andy's. I can see here somebody had an interesting Star Wars statistics week. So here you go. Andy had Dashboard Week Day 2 on vegetables. And everybody then makes their dashboard and posts a bit about what they did. I just pulled some up as examples. So DS20 during their dashboard week. So here the CARES Act, the US Congress passed to help companies through the early stages of the COVID debacle, included loans to small businesses. So there's data surrounding this, and you can see exactly where the data's from because Andy would have attached the data here and given some context to what the data's about. And again, another one from DS20. So this, I remember we got to participate in, had a lot of data. And again, there's a Harvard Dataverse. And one from our dashboard week, we did it on, so day 1 was Gulf of Mexico water temperature observations. And again, the data can be downloaded. There's a spreadsheet, there's all sorts of files and shape files. And if you want to see what people created, you can see that too, because their blog posts are all up, as you can see. And you can stalk their Tableau public profile to see more and how they approached it. And remember, you can pick inspiration from their profiles or from their submissions and maybe take something you liked and include it in your application viz. So this might be useful for you who are working with an unfamiliar data set, just because it's nice to pick inspiration from other people. So very quickly, final tips, something I wish I'd known before applying. Twitter and the community. So asking for help in LinkedIn. Just keep asking for help if you need it. Use Google. It's really, really handy. It's not about a complex dashboard. Like I said, you are a consultant at the end of the day. It's about presenting the best way to look at your data. And if I'm thinking about a tip or resource that you should know, I've already mentioned this handy hack by searching for Dashboard Week. There's so many data sets in there. Look at what people created during their dashboard weeks if you want. You can use Andy's videos. I really do enjoy going back and just using it as a follow along to build something, because how often do you build, I don't know, a hex map for the US? And finally, you're already doing the right thing by being here. So that's obviously a really handy tip. And I think that's it from me. If you do have any questions, I will be around afterwards. Happy to speak to you about anything you need, and you can also drop it in the chat. I can answer. But otherwise, thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it back.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alicia. Some really great tips there. Up next, I think we have Garth. Thank you, Garth.
Yes, thank you, Sophie. How's it going, guys? My name is Garth Turner. I'm part of DS24, which started about halfway through last year. And I'm finishing up my first placement now at Viacom, which is a sort of multimedia company based in America. I studied industrial engineering in South Africa. I'm originally from South Africa. I spent the vast majority of my life there. And I finished up that degree in 2019. And then I headed over to the States for a bit to sort of just not get a real job and work on the ski slopes for a little bit because I wasn't ready to dive straight into my career. And then I came straight to the UK and started looking for jobs. And when I came across the information lab, one thing that really sort of jumped out at me was just how useful data visualization is to sort of higher stakeholders and people that have been in industry for a while. And I sort of first encountered this when I was doing my thesis during my degree. I basically had to build a decision support system for a fuel distribution company that basically told them where to put promotions at different sort of fuel depots around the country. And the model was really good. It spat out the right results and everything, but it was just data. And when I brought it to the company and sort of showed them the data it was spitting out, they liked it, and they were chuffed. It was the right stuff which was giving them, but it wasn't really visualized or anything. So in my sort of last 2 weeks of my thesis, I just threw it into Power BI because it was the only data visualization software I had available to me, and I created some dashboards really quickly that I showed to them, and I'm going to show you those now because I've dug them up, and before you see them, they are not pretty. They are really, really terrible. But it was basically a way of creating some interactive dashboards that they could sort of play around with and see their data visualized in a different way. And they were absolutely blown away. Now, bear in mind, this was 2019, so data visualization has come a long way since then, and it's more sort of frequently used these days. But just the reaction that they had to seeing this dashboard was quite incredible to me, even though it's awful. It's a terrible dashboard that when I look at it now, I can't believe I was sort of happy with handing this in. But these businessmen that had been in industry for a while were really, really happy with it and like just excited about it. And it was the first time they had seen their data visualized in such a way. So that's why when I stumbled across the information lab, I was really, really keen, and this sort of bell went off in my head that this was a really, really useful industry to be in, combined with the sort of whole ETL process that can be used with it. So anyway, then I decided to apply, and I was up in Norwich with my girlfriend and her family, and during the day I was applying for jobs, and at night we'd usually just watch something on Netflix. So I thought I might as well use some data that I was familiar with currently. So I downloaded this Netflix dataset, which was luckily quite a clean, sort of straightforward dataset. It just had sort of whether it was a movie or a TV show, its title, director, cast, where it's from, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I threw that into Tableau and made my first attempt when this was my application viz. It initially looked a little bit worse, and then Luke helped me out with some tips. And what I tried to do was have a really sort of Netflixy theme, and then try go along with the prompts that Netflix kind of gives you when you go on the platform, like what to watch, what's hot, and sort of who's watching, that kind of thing. So it was a really straightforward dashboard, nothing too fancy. I think the hardest thing to build was this little screen that was meant to be a TV that has the map inside it. This took me a long time to create in my early days, and it was very, very frustrating. But essentially, it just tells you where the content's from, how much content there is on Netflix between sort of movies and TV shows. There's a lot of things I would change about this visualization now, but as a start, I was quite proud of it. it then tells you sort of what the top titles on Netflix at the time were, and how many views they got in their first month. And then I try to be really fancy and build a radial bar chart to sort of compare Netflix to its competitors. I was really happy with this. And then I was told that it was completely unnecessary and I could have used just a normal bar chart, which actually makes sense because this is actually really hard to read. But it was fun learning how to build it. And as Alicia said, I went on the DS blog and found some blogs on which basically walked me through how to build it. So it was not that difficult. So that was my application viz, and then we were given our data set for the final round, which was this 311 calls in New York City, which was a really cool data set. And again, what I tried to do was just keep it simple, not have too much going on. In my application viz, I had a bit too much going on, so you didn't really know where to look, and it kind of didn't read very nicely or tell a story. Whereas here, I sort of tried to split it up a bit better and really have proper sections. And then I also just had the sort of where, when, what, which to answer those specific questions. So those are my application vizes. Looking back at them, it's interesting. There's a lot I would definitely change now that I've been through the DS and worked in industry and knowing what works and what doesn't work. But it was all part of the learning process, and I've really enjoyed sort of developing these skills over the last year and a bit. So lastly, before I hand over, the one thing I wish I knew, I think Sophie mentioned this, but it's a website called Coolers, which basically picks out color palettes for you. So if you press the spacebar, it kind of just whoops out all different ones. And I've basically used this to build all my dashboards ever since. And it's a really nice way to choose colors. Because I originally thought that I had good taste in terms of colors, and I was told quite quickly that I don't. So this has helped me out since then. But I'll be in the Remo room after this as well if you have any other questions about my application or the data school. So I'll hand over to whoever is next. I think it's Henry.
Hello, I'm next. Thank you, Garth. I've just got to try and share on 2 screens. 1 second. Cool. I think that's working. So hey everybody, I'm Henry, and I'm from the 23rd cohort in the Data School UK, and I'm on my P2 right now, and I finished my training last August. In my first placement, I was at a company called City and County Healthcare, and in this placement, I was using Alteryx to help them automate their invoices. And currently, right now, I'm at PwC in the Deals Tech team. So in my initial application, what you see on the screen right now is what I submitted. And what it was about is it was about the stop and search that was being carried out in England and Wales, more so specifically the Metropolitan Police, which is the police force which operates in Greater London. So firstly, I'm going to talk about how I chose my dataset. So if I open up Edge, this is the website which I use and has been previously mentioned by my colleagues. This is the government website for open data sources. And this is a great place because for the most part, the data sources are very good to use in the fact that they're quite clean. So you can just bang it into Tableau and you can start visualizing very quickly. In terms of manipulating this data set, which I ended up using, I think if I recall correctly, I did have to do some changes to the areas, and that's because I had mapping involved in my final visualization. And in order to make the maps work, I had to change the titles of the areas slightly. But apart from that, the data source was very clean. So as you can see on this website, this data source, this open data source website, you can see here that the government has kind of given us a load of categories and a load of data sets which we can use. So if I go into business and economy, we can see that here straight away I've got something useful. I can research and look into the UK price index. So what I did here originally was just browse around to see if I could find anything interesting and to see if there's any data sets which I wanted to investigate to uncover any insights. And what I ended up landing on ultimately was this one here, stop and search by ethnicity. And this kind of met my criteria in the fact that I kind of found it interesting, and it's a very open-ended data set as well. I could uncover quite a lot about it. And I guess in terms of background, I was very interested in this topic because I was intrigued about the fact that in kind of discussions previously that I've heard that people of black ethnicity are stopped disproportionately by the police. And this is one thing that I wanted to investigate in this data set. So if I go into the data set, so here we've got a quick preview, which they give you, but I'm going to show you in Excel what it looks like. You can see here that it's generally pretty nice. I'd say for Tableau standards, it's actually a very great data set. We've got the measure names, we've got the years that it happens, the ethnicity type, the where it occurred, and also the number of stop and searches that have happened in that time period, and also the rate as well. And like I said, I did some light changes to this data set. In fact, I think I changed the geography a little bit, so then the maps worked in my dashboard. So next up, I'm going to go through my dashboard, and this is what it looks like, and this is the first page. I kind of went for kind of an unconventional, let's say, method of creating a dashboard. From what I've seen previously, people tend to go for a long form dashboard, whereas I've gone for a more of a storyboard type of dashboard. And as you can see here, I've got kind of 3 stages to my story. And kind of my philosophy for designing this dashboard is I kind of describe it as like a funnel, or I can also describe it as like looking at something in a museum. So if you're referring to the funnel analogy, what this first page is kind of the top of the funnel, where you've kind of got an overview of what you want to talk about, and then as you go down the funnel, your scope decreases. So what you're very focused in what you're trying to investigate and show. And if you used to use the museum analogy, what that is when you picture yourself in a museum and you see something a bit far away, which you're intrigued about. That's kind of the first stage. You're a bit intrigued about it. And the second stage is when you get a bit closer and you can see it in more detail. And then the last stage, which is the most detailed, is when you're right up close and your nose is pretty much touching the painting or statue or whatever. So this is kind of, this first page here is kind of the first stage. And what I focused on is kind of who and where the stop and searches were happening. So in this first chart here, I focused on where it was happening the most. And another way I showed this was also using a heat map. No, this is not a heat map. I think it's called a different map, Claroplaf map or something like that. And you can see here that there's clearly a hotspot for the Metropolitan Police. So that kind of triggered me to focus more on the Metropolitan Police. And this is furthered by here at the bottom that Metropolitan Police has carried out a disproportionate amount of stop and searches compared to all other areas in England and Wales. In hindsight, one thing I would have changed is I probably would have used something. I wouldn't have used the hard numbers. I would have used the rates instead, because I appreciate that there's stuff such as population density which plays into a factor here. So going into the second stage of my dashboard, here I focused on the time and how it's kind of varied over the years. We can see here it's kind of peaked at 2008, and I found this quite interesting. And here I also focused on, at this point, I also focused on Metropolitan Police specifically, and that was following the first stage previously. And kind of my story here is kind of, I wanted to focus on this peak and how it's kind of fallen over time, the amount of stop and searches. And I did a bit of research and found out that the Home Office kind of brought in some measures to make stop and search a bit more fair and less kind of liberal and dishing out stop and searches everywhere. And then lastly, focusing even in more detail, I decided to create this slide in my dashboard about who was being stopped and searched. And I focused specifically on ethnicity and the question of, is the use of stop and search in London discriminatory? And as you can see here, we can see that it is discriminatory, and people of black ethnicity are being stopped and searched the most. And to further to that, I have got different tabs here to allow the user to compare how many more times you are more likely to be stopped and searched compared to other ethnicities if you, for example, in this slide, you are of person of black ethnicity. So this is kind of a very quick rundown of what I did for my dashboard. Of course, there's other stuff involved in this dashboard, such as interactivity. So if I click this, it changes the numbers on the left-hand side. But if you'd like to know a bit more about this dashboard, just drop us a message or an email. But moving on to my tips. My first tip is the 5 W's and how. And the 5 W's are who, what, when, where, why, and also lastly how. And this will help you basically create questions to basically inspire you for your dashboard that you create, and basically find points of analysis for you to focus on, and it will help you quite a lot. And this leads me on to my next kind of tip, and that is to sketch out and brainstorm your things on paper. I remember for my initial application and also my final application, I was kind of a mad scientist again, and I had pieces of A4 paper everywhere, all over the floor, with my sketches and ideas and bullet points. And from these like brainstorms, you can kind of see quite quickly. Let's say I wasn't sure if I wanted to use this data set. You can quickly see which is a good data set to use and which is a not so good data set to use. For example, if the data set is quite closed off and narrow. And then I guess another tip is to perhaps use the Tableau mapping site, which has been created by Craig Bloodworth, our CTO at the Information Lab. And using this, you can basically create stuff as like, I'm not sure if it applies to the US map so much, but it helped me create this map right here and separate England and Wales into its individual parts. And just so you can see it clearly, this is the link here, tablowmapping.bi/map. And my last tip in this section is probably to say that you should try and get to know your data and the context as well. So make sure you do your research around it. So like I mentioned, I did a bit of research to find out that the Home Office did introduce measures to reduce the amount of stop and searches and make it more fair. And also in my final application as well, I became acquainted with American football, for example, and I never watched or knew much about American football. So for Andy in the interview, for him to ask if I knew about American football, even though I'd never touched it before the interview, it was a pretty good feeling, and it probably played a lot in my favor in me getting the offer as well. So my last section is about some of the things I do differently. So some of the things I do differently is that I'd include less words in my dashboards. So overall, this is probably borderline too many words. Because of course, as Luke mentioned in the comments previously, if you scroll up a bit, it's not just about your dashboard, it's about how you present it as well, and also the insights you give. My second tip on things if I could do things differently is don't be such a perfectionist and submit your work for feedback earlier. So one thing I was kind of mindful of is that I didn't want to bombard the company with requests of, can you give me feedback on this, that, and the other? And I kind of waited until my very last final drafts before I asked for feedback. But it played out in the end. I got the job, but maybe I could have asked for feedback sooner. And being on the other side as well, giving feedback, you kind of see that people here are very open to giving feedback, so you don't need to worry about this aspect. And my final tip is to adding to don't be such a perfectionist is the quote which sometimes I remember is, sometimes it's better to have things 80% done and on time rather than do things 100% and late. So yeah, that's all from me. And if there's nothing else, I'll hand over to Adam next, I believe. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Thanks, Henry. Hello, everyone. My name's Adam. I actually in the same cohort as Henry's, the 23rd cohort. Henry, you're still sharing your screen, by the way, because it appears on mine. And yeah, I think similar to what Alicia was saying, I also applied twice before I got in. So I got in on the second time round. And there's kind of some things you learn from that as well, which means I have two kind of starter vizzes, I suppose. I'm going to show you my original one because I think that's more valuable to show where I really started from. But I'm going to talk about some tips first, starting with kind of the dataset stuff, as that's kind of how we started this. Yeah, so I recommend kind of going for trying to find a clean one and getting straight into the data. And as other people have said, it is so valuable to kind of get to know your data. So for me, I see that as plug it into Tableau and just whack up random charts and whatever, just to understand what's going on, just to get kind of the beginning of an idea of a story that you might want to be telling in your dashboard. That's so crucial because then it gives you a bit of direction. I often found that when I was kind of given the task of just make a viz on anything, you go, okay, but where do I start? And Sophie made some good points with kind of, if you have a passion or a hobby or those kind of things, then yeah, go down there. And you've seen some resources like the government websites where you can just go and you can just kind of scroll through some different data sets about different things and see if something catches your eye. Where I got my data set from, if I just share my screen, was this, the resources tab of the Tableau Public website, and it has a whole list of different data sets from different kind of areas. So we have like entertainment and sports and public data, education, and so on. So I use this one, this FAA wildlife strikes, and it's been used before. It's not necessarily the most original or anything, but the data is pretty clean and it is pretty interesting. And using a data set like this meant that I kind of get to go straight into actually making the viz. And yeah, I was going to quickly show you that and then talk about what I didn't do the second time round. Because I didn't do that. Second time round, I decided to do one of the other options was kind of build your own data set about something you know. So first time round, I wasn't necessarily interested in wildlife strikes, which was about specifically, it was about airplanes colliding with animals, right? It's a very specific thing. It wasn't something that I was interested in before, but it was interesting data to look into. So second time round, I took it more of a kind of a personal project, and I'm interested in Doctor Who, right? So I decided, okay, let me see if there's a big Doctor Who data set, because there's obviously loads and loads of episodes of Doctor Who, so maybe there's a big data set that's got information about those kind of things. And I ended up spending quite a long time finding one and then building it myself and spending quite a lot of time getting it to a certain point that I was happy with, and then making the visualization before thinking, is this going to make a good visualization? So in the end, the visualization, it was fine. It was all right, and it got me into the next stage. But it was not very accessible to anyone, because if you don't know about the topic, then you can't really be explained that whole very specific thing. Oh, yeah, thank you, Luke. Good point. If you're not aware of Doctor Who, it's a very long-running sci-fi TV series, just a TV show that's been going on for a very long time. Yeah, but it's not a very accessible topic, and it means that the visualizations and the insights you might bring from it might not be of interest or as easy to explain why it would be of interest to somebody else. And it also meant that I spent a lot of my time making the data set and not making the visualization, which is not going to come across when I then describe it. You know, if I then presenting my visualization, you don't know that I've put loads of hours into building the data set because you just see the visualization. So you gotta, so of the two methods that I took, although one ended up leading me to getting the offer, the first way was definitely more advisable because it was just a lot simpler and cleaner, and allowed me to find a better story and a better level of insight, which all of those data sets on that Tableau website allow you to have. And it means most of them you won't need much prep either. And I would imagine the kind of prep you need on those is kind of limited to what Sophie was showing you earlier with just the data interpreter. You plug it in, you click the checkbox, and suddenly you've got data that you can work with. Yeah, so some other tips. Yeah, so it's good to have, Alicia was saying about how in the NFL data set, because I had the same one for my final viz as well. It was a really, really big data set. And when you have a massive data set, as she was saying, it's difficult to kind of carve through that to find a story because there's so much information. And she filtered it down to top 10. And I think I did a similar thing where I just filtered it very much down to a very specific thing. And the focus of my visualization on that point was what makes Tom Brady like the best quarterback. Apologies for controversy. But yeah, and I focused on that as a one very specific story, focus on one person and kind of work out, do the stats back it up? And that's kind of a good tip for when you find a really big data set is ask yourself a much more specific question. And that's kind of, there's a balance in the data sets you find of a really niche one, like a one about Doctor Who, and a really broad one, maybe something like GDP per capita, you know, for every country in the world. That's way too broad. It's going to be harder to find a good story in that. Whereas Doctor Who, that's too niche. Not everyone's going to care, quite frankly. So it's a bit too small. So being able to find an interesting story on whatever data set that you do land on is the kind of the key to it, from my perspective. And then once you've kind of applied, I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of how you respond. I think a lot of it is how you respond to feedback. I know that first time round, I kind of took a lot of the feedback as criticism, and I took it a bit too personally, and it wasn't necessarily reflected in anything that I said or anything, but sometimes it was difficult to kind of understand what you'd done wrong. But what you have to remember is the people giving you feedback are like, they're professionals. So one, they do know what they're talking about and they're probably right. And two, they are genuinely trying to help you. And if you ask for clarification, or if you go, I don't understand why this makes this thing better, they'll tell you. And you should take every bit of advice and help that they offer out, because they genuinely want you to become better at this at every stage. So don't be afraid of any of that kind of thing. If you get a really long bit of kind of feedback that seems like, oh, because there's so much feedback, that must mean that it's, you know, rubbish. That's almost certainly not the case. There's just lots to say, because there often is just lots to say. If I was to write feedback on my own original application, I probably would have had lots to say as well. So kind of trying to interpret that feedback correctly. And even if you don't understand it, maybe just try and implement what they've said and then compare it to what you did originally and see if you can understand why it's better. Because I think that was what I ended up doing and could understand, okay, no, they were right. As much as I didn't understand it, they were right. And doing it this way clearly makes for a better viz. So if I share my, I think I've got what Sophie had, and it's deciding not to show me the window that I want to click on. All right, we'll do the whole screen. So apologies for the interception. All right, so this is my first viz on the wildlife strikes. And similar to some other approaches, I kind of went with the ask a question, answer the question in the viz, ask a question in the title, answer it in the visualization. So looking back on this, there's definitely some things in here that I like, and there's definitely some things in here that I would do differently now. I don't know why the logo is so absolutely massive, but it is in the correct place. And some of these kind of big numbers at the top are always kind of I think those are quite an easy go-to to make for a good start for a viz. It kind of gets you in it and kind of gives you that groundwork to continue onwards. What I would say I like about this is it's got quite a good intro sentence, and kind of it just kind of begins, and there's not too much waffle, but there also isn't many words at all, which has its positives and negatives. And yeah, similarly to other people's, it's all simple charts. It's a bar chart, it's a map. And I kind of liked to do a lot of I kind of learned as I made this. So lots of charts have like charts within them because I was learning how to do that. So I thought I'd put it in. And I think a lot of these work as filters as well for the other charts. And yeah, these are the kind of things as I was learning them, I would put them in. But I think what's important is kind of the flow. So it says, where are these collisions happening? So you start kind of with a broad view of, okay, these are the places that are happening. These are the airports, but these are the states. And you kind of get that from that. And then you go, okay, who are the troublemakers? What kind of animals are doing this? I think that's too vague and I would have changed it now. But I think I wanted to put the word troublemakers in for some reason. Yeah, and then going, what's the damage? And then another big number appears and you get kind of the context along with that big number, along with a story in here. Yeah, as well as I may change a lot of, as well as I may like to change a lot of these things if I was to do it again. What I do like is the flow, is it keeps asking questions and it keeps getting down to the point. So now we're on to how did this actually affect flights? And then what did this cost airports? So it's kind of, that's quite a specific question, but it started off with just where, and then it goes all the way down to what did it actually cost. And I think considering that flow and considering that story in your dashboards is quite important, and can be one of the first things you kind of think about, is what story can you tell once you've got your data set. If you work out what story you want to tell, then you can kind of go straight to sketching it out, because I didn't do that beginning at all. I didn't used to sketch them out until I started training and was told you should always start by sketching it out. And sketching it out just kind of, it allows you to kind of test the flow without having to build all the charts, because you can test this basic flow of where, who, what, how, and then what again. You can test that out just in a sketch. You don't have to make the whole thing. Yeah, so you can get feedback kind of from yourself just from that point, and then you can jump straight into it. Yeah. I'll see if I've got any more tips for you, but I think, yeah. Oh yeah, this was a really good one. They may have told you. They always told me, and I never really believed them to do it because it seems strange. But show your kind of draft or your first draft or whatever to somebody who doesn't know what you're doing, and see how they interpret what you've done, because you may spend hours and hours and hours making your visualization, spending way too much time on it, and then therefore you'll know how every single thing works and what everything's supposed to mean. But that doesn't mean that somebody else is going to be able to just know what that means. So show it to, I don't know, one of your parents or somebody who just doesn't know what they're supposed to be looking at, and see if they say the things that you're expecting them to say. I think that's a big one, because it tells you how it's been interpreted, and it's feedback from someone who doesn't know how to give feedback on this. It's not like giving feedback from one of us where we'll say, oh yeah, you need to change this and this and this and these things. It's someone who's just like, you could be a client. I think that's kind of a good way to look at it. And I think that's probably my final tip on that. I, like everyone else, will be around afterwards if you want to kind of ask me any more questions about anything, or if you want to see my Doctor Who vids, I'll show you that one. But yeah, I think I'm heading off to Hannah now.
Thank you. Hi guys, yeah, my name's Hannah, and I'm part of DS24 as well, so the same as Garth. We started back in June of last year, And I started my Tableau journey about a year ago, so in the March of last year, and it's kind of been a bit of a whirlwind since then. So a bit about me, I did a degree in history and French at the University of Nottingham, and I graduated in 2019. So I really didn't come from a data background, and I didn't really know what I was doing when I first downloaded Tableau and started playing around. But like Sophie said, when I was applying, I saw the advice to do your viz on something that interests you or something you know. And so I went a bit niche and I decided to do mine on a module I did at university, and I wasn't quite done with it yet in my head. And so my application viz was on European witchcraft, which I did find very interesting, but finding my data was very difficult because I thought there would be a lot when I started looking. I thought there'd be loads on witchcraft, gender, and all of that. But the problem is it's such old data, it doesn't actually exist. So a lot of my application time was spent finding this data in books and various journals and compiling my own data set, which just made life really, really hard for myself. I wouldn't recommend doing it at all because it took me so long. I was reading books, pulling out figures and citing all these sources, and it was just very, very difficult. And yeah, just made life really, really hard and took so much time. So yeah, that would be my thought on that. I would show you the data sources, but they're lost on my own personal computer somewhere. I don't even know where they are. But yeah, then when I had my data, I started thinking about the topics and how I wanted to present this data. And so, as some of the others have mentioned, I sketched a lot. Like I had pieces of paper everywhere, like Henry said, and I was scribbling down questions, ideas, and like chart types, pretty much any idea that came to me at any hour of the day, which I found really useful to kind of like compile it later on. So I would definitely do that because for me anyway, Tableau ideas come to me at all hours and it's just best to write them down. So yeah, when I was doing that, I spent a lot of time looking through like Tableau Public and kind of getting ideas and seeing the types of charts that I could build and then trying to guess what they were called and then Googling them and YouTubing them and trying to find ways to build them and trying them out and just seeing how they worked for me. So yeah, and then I'll show you kind of my application. So I approached my application a little bit like an essay because I was a history student and that's pretty much the only way I knew how to analyze data and information. And I think that's really apparent when you look at my application because firstly, it's really, really long and each section is structured a little bit. I kind of replaced what I would do as a paragraph with a chart and a bit of writing. I wouldn't recommend doing that. It does not need to be this lengthy. And I think now knowing more about containers and space use, I would definitely do it differently and kind of just make it a little bit more condensed, a little bit more user friendly, because I'm not sure many people would actually make it to the end of that viz now. I also use a little bit too much text. Old habits die hard, and I found it really, really hard to cut back on writing small paragraphs alongside my charts. And this text is also too small. Realistically, I think you shouldn't be using text smaller than I think 10 or 11 on your viz. And this, I think, is an 8. So it's just too small and there's too much of it. And it just doesn't, it's not great best practice. So yeah, this is my viz. I started off with this map and I learned trial and error. So this map took me about 2.5 to 3 hours. It really shouldn't, but there we go. And I kept kind of experimenting and building from there. So there's a lot of bar charts. A fair few started off as pie charts, and after Andy's advice, they became bar charts because he's not a massive fan of those. And yeah, just experimented, tried different things. This bit I'm particularly proud of. It took ages because Tableau doesn't recognize dates before, I think, the 2000s. So I don't even remember how I got around that. And then, yeah, again, just a lot of text. And then at the bottom, which I also think is important, is you should cite where you got your data and any information or images. I think that's quite important as well, because it is a piece of work and it's out public. And you do really need to say where you got your information. So yeah, once I had my dashboard, I did, as the other suggested, I went onto Twitter and I asked a couple of data schools I connect with to have a look, give me a little bit of feedback and any kind of adjustments I could make. It's kind of the same process as you'll get for the second interview. And also talking kind of what Adam said, I also showed it to my nan, who I thought if she could understand it, then pretty much anyone could, because she's quite technologically challenged. And if she could kind of read through it, then I thought, my chances were pretty good for other people being able to read it. So yeah, this is kind of where I got. In terms of hints, things I would do differently. Yes, I've spoken about text, massive chunks of text and size. Don't use a custom font. It's a bit of a strange one, but you'll have loads and loads of options on Tableau, especially if you're using the desktop version, and they won't translate to public. So I would stick with the kind of the classics like Arial or anything that says Tableau in front of it, because otherwise it would just completely mess things up when you upload it. It doesn't have to be this long, or I don't think it should be this long, but also there isn't a size limit. So I think you need to find the balance between not trying to cram things like into really small spaces where you can't read them, but also probably not doing what I did, which is making just a massive sheet of charts. So kind of finding that balance with, like I said earlier, using space and using containers properly. 100% Twitter, any kind of communication, LinkedIn, like the others have said, data schools are more than happy to help, but definitely reach out and get it and kind of implement it and be prepared to talk about how you implemented it. And kind of what I regret is probably that I learned through my application rather than learning a bit before and then doing my application. So I would do Makeover Mondays. I know they're not running anymore, but all the data sets are still up there. And I would definitely practice and learn some new charts and kind of get a bit more familiar with the software before you start building your application, because it definitely shows, I think, when you've had a bit more practice, and it just makes it a lot more enjoyable for you and a lot easier if you kind of know what you're doing before you start. I think I changed and I learned a lot in between my first and second interviews, and that's because I did a lot more practice in the middle. And yeah, no one expects it to be perfect. I think you need to be prepared to talk about the choices you made and why you put them in. So if you think this particular chart is good and some of the interview team don't, that's fine. Like, you're not expected to be perfect, but if you can explain what your thought process and why you chose that chart, that's just as good. And be prepared to respond to their feedback as well. After my first interview with Andy, I did actually make adjustments on this as well, following some of his feedback, and just have fun with it. I actually really enjoyed building this, even though at times it drove me mad. But I think it's important to kind of enjoy what you're doing, because it is going to be a part of the job that you're hoping to do for the future. So yeah, that is pretty much everything from me.